So I'm going to talk about a nice little algebraic problem that is somehow related to the second part of Alex's talk. And I will start explaining the idea behind my talk today, right now. So the general idea is the following. I will take an equation mainly from fluid mechanics. And I will assume that initially, so the initial datum, it has independent centered Gaussian Fourier coefficients. Okay, and of course, when you apply a nonlinear dynamic to this type of thing, they will correlate at some point. But I want to quantify now how these Fourier coefficients at later time, so when you make the equation evolve, how they will differ from independent centered Gaussian variable. Okay. So somehow this is related to the propagation of chaos in wave turbulence. Okay, but what I want to example here by looking directly at the Euler equation is that it is not necessarily a dispersive phenomenon. Okay, so that you might observe this phenomenon without having a kinetic equation in particular. Okay, so how can you see how Gaussian, random variables differ from Gaussian variables? And this you can do because the law of Gaussian variables is completely determined by what is called the Wick formula that I have written here. So it says the following. So if you take a collection of real or complex Gaussian variables, so here that I wrote GL, and you want to know the expectation of their product, you can know it only by knowing 2 by 2 correlations. Okay? Which says the following. So you take the set of the integers between 1 and r, and you divide it into little pairs. Okay? So you partition it as pairs. Okay? This is why what I wrote as a set of involution without fixed point, this is exactly the same. And you look at all these partitions in pairs of 1R, and then you take, when you sum on them, and you look at the product of the correlation between the pairs. Okay? And this fully gives you the expectation of a product of Gaussians, and it characterizes their law completely. Okay. So if you're not familiar with this formula, we can check that it is not completely crazy. And so in particular, so the first thing is that if your number of Gaussian is odd, okay, then what happens is that you never can partition the integers from 1 to r into pairs. It will never work. Okay, so in this case, it's always 0, okay, which is fine because this is what you assume for a Gaussian in general. Okay, and so what happens if you have with R even real Gaussian, so I'm taking R times the same one. Okay, I assume that it's normalized because it's easier. So what you learned from the previous formula is that the expectation of G to the R is the cardinal of the pairings of 1R. Okay, and if you try to compute this, you will retrieve the usual formula. So how do you find these pairings? Well, you take first R over 2 among R elements. Okay, so this gives you R over 2 among R, and then you match them to the R over 2 others, so you multiply by R over 2 factorial, so this is why you get this R factorial divided by R over 2 factorial. But when you do this, you pick a first one and then a second one, and you have to remove this choice, and so this is why you divide by 2 to the power R over 2, and indeed, it is the right formula that you get by integration by parts. In the complex situation, it is very similar. So in this case, you need, because of the invariance under phase, you need to take the first one to be G, the first R over 2 to be G, and then the last one to be G bar. Okay, and if it's normalized and you want to apply the Wick formula, so the only way for the expectation of the two being non-zero is to take the first one as G and the second one as G bar. And this tells you that you need to match the first R over 2 1 with the second R over 2, with the last R over 2, and so this is only R over 2 factorial. It's the right solution. Okay, so my motivation into doing this is that if you look at the derivation of a kinetic equation in the physics literature, well, you assume that you will have some sort of propagation of this type of the Wick formula as long as it goes on. So what do I mean by this? I mean that you imagine that you will have propagation of chaos, and if you start with independent Fourier coefficient, then as time goes by, they will remain in a certain sense, independent at later times. And the reason that is invoked is that you are going to take an asymptotic regime, because otherwise it cannot be true, okay, where you have more and more and more Fourier coefficients. And the thing is that if you have, say, L Fourier coefficients, okay, and now you look at all the couples, you have L square of them. But then if you are looking, the ones that are correlated are only in the diagonal. And so if you look at the proportion, it will be 1 over L, so it will go to 0. Okay? And this is exactly what I will exploit in this talk and nothing more than this. Okay. Now, what do I want to say? There is a nice work, as you know, by Yudeng and Zaherani on the quantum equation, where they derive a kinetic equation for Schrödinger equations. And in the first work, they deduce from the derivation of short times the propagation of chaos up to a kinetic time scale. Okay? And so what I understand from all this series of work, from the work by Yudeng and Zaher, but also from other work that Alex told us about, so in particular the work by Stafilani and Tran and Buckmaster, Germain, Annie, Chatta, Colo Germain, and Bukarinen and Spohn, but I forget, I'm sure, many people. So the thing is that I am not sure that in this mathematical work you really use propagation of chaos per se. You prove it at the same time somehow. But from what I understand, it becomes helpful if you want to derive a kinetic equation for a longer time. I don't mean longer time scales, but for short time derivation, it seems not to be something that you need to think about too much. But when you go to longer time, so up to the time of existence of the wave kinetic equation, then it might be interesting to know that you have indeed propagation of chaos. Okay. So my framework is the following. So there will be a theorem, of course, and in this theorem there are going to be 2 parts. And the first part is very algebraic, and there is almost no analysis in it, and so it applies to many equations. And but I chose not to write a very generic equation because I thought it would be awful. So I decided to focus on simply the incompressible Euler equation, but really to emphasize that this is not a dispersive phenomenon. Okay, so the incompressible Euler equation. So we have talked a lot about the Navier-Stokes equation today. So it is the same, but nu is equal to 0. Okay, and as Alex has said before, so the incompressibility comes from the fact that if you take the divergence of the equation that is on top, then you will be able to express the Laplacian of p in terms of u at a fixed time. And so somehow you could, if you like, express a gradient of p in terms of u, but when you have just the incompressible Euler equation on the full space, this is usually not what you do. So what you do, what we do is that we look at we take the Leray projector. Okay, so I think that Laurent introduced it this morning. It's a simple zero-order differential operator, and what it does is that it projects orthogonally in L2 onto divergence-free functions. So in particular, gradients of functions, they lie in the orthogonal of divergence-free functions. So if you apply the Leray projector to the gradient of P, it becomes 0. So now, if you look at the first equation, and I want it on divergence-free functions because it's incompressible, then what will happen is the following. I will transform my nice Euler equation onto just one line, which is that dtu plus the Leray projector of u scalar nabla u is equal to 0. And because I did not say it because we talked of the Euler and Navier-Stokes equation all day, I just recall that U is a velocity field, and so it has values in RD a priori. Okay, and my space, sorry, is a Euclidean space, so it is also RD. So just a little remark. So if you look at this equation, it does not depend at all on the position on the position x where you look at your equation. So it's local. And so the point is that, so the thing is that if you shift your base position, it will absolutely not change the equation, which is the same as saying that the equation is invariant under the action of spatial translations. And one consequence of this is that if you want to be in a periodic setting, you just have to set that the initial datum is periodic, and it will be a priori propagated by the flow of the equation. Okay. 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 So I will need to set up an initial datum for my Cauchy problem, and I choose to present this Gaussian field. So the initial datum is this AL. Okay, so it has this expression, so it's the sum over z to the power d, but I remove 0. And then I have, okay, so the Fourier variable, the Fourier function, and which is normalized in this case. And then I have my Fourier coefficient, and I assume that my Fourier coefficient is this function A of k over L, when the Fourier coefficient is k over L. And then it's multiplied by some Gaussian gk, okay? And as I told you, so the Fourier coefficient are assumed to be, Gaussians. Okay, so I like this normalization because it's nice. So when you take L to go to infinity, this converges to a nice Wiener integral again, which was featured into the talk of Laurent this morning. Okay. So here you see that I see my asymptotic regime. So I am my initial datum. It is 2 pi L periodic, okay, which means that in the dual space, so in the Fourier space, my Fourier coefficient are taken into 1 over L ZD, and this is how you get more and more Fourier coefficients. Okay, so you have somehow like an order of L to the power D Fourier coefficient, and so you expect that when you are looking at expectations, you get some decay like 1 over L to the power D. Sorry. So let's make more precise hypothesis about the initial datum. So I said that the Fourier coefficient should be Gaussians, but it's also I don't want to have a complex velocity for my fluid, so I want to have real velocity. And for this, I will have to ask something about the Gaussian, and in particular that gk is equal to g minus k bar. And also, for the same reason, I ask that the function that defines the size of the coefficient is even. Okay, for technical reason, I also assume that it's bounded and compactly supported. It's maybe too much, but I thought it was better than tracking the norm to say it this way. And then there is the last hypothesis that I need is just related to the fact that I'm looking at divergence-free functions, okay? And so I have to assume that my initial datum is also divergence-free, and this is why I ask that I have difficulties with losing this pointer. So this is why I ask that psi scalar A of psi is actually equal to 0. So it's not a crazy assumption, it's just to match the divergence-free condition. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the invariance of the equation. As I told you, the function, so the initial datum, it is real valued. It is also 2 pi L periodic. So it is also true for the solution at later time, so UL. So I asked that initially I did not charge the 0 mode. Okay, this is due to the fact that if you look at the Fourier coefficient of wavelength 0, this is a quantity that is a priori conserved by the flow for periodic solutions. And so I choose it 0 initially, and this will be propagated at later times. Okay. Maybe I should just mention that regarding these problems of correlations and so on, so somehow I think that this invariance, it is very similar to the invariance, sorry, I say under U1, but I want to say the invariance by changing phase for the Schrödinger equation. Okay, so what do I want to say? Okay, and then another invariance of AL is that its law is actually invariant under the action of spatial translation. So what does it mean? So if you look at AL of X, it is a Gaussian. Okay, so it's completely determined by its variance. And what I want to say by this is simply that its variance does not depend on X. The variance of AL of X does not depend on X. Okay. But since it is also true for the equation, it means that the phase translation, they commute with the flow. And so it will also be true for the law of the solution at later times. And this implies a very nice first thing that I might want to know about the expectation of product of Fourier coefficients, is that if I want the expectation of the product of this Fourier coefficient at wave number psi L not to be zero, this implies automatically an algebraic condition of the psi L is that their sum should be zero. Otherwise, this is automatically not zero. Okay? So I see that here the algebra of the psi L, it may have some importance into computing the divergence from the Wick formula. So Fourier coefficient, so I also define my Fourier transform. So in this case, I normalize it in this way. So with L over 2, such that initially, so at initial time, the Fourier coefficient are indeed of size 1. Okay, it does not depend on L, so I just have A of psi and then the Gaussian. Okay, so my goal now is to estimate for a given R, and at least locally in time, this quantity. So I want to know how this, I really cannot use this, sorry. So I want to estimate how this quantity, this expectation of a product of Fourier coefficients, it differs from the Wick formula. Okay. And so I am in an asymptotic regime. Okay, so I want to know how this goes on as my number of Fourier coefficient goes to infinity. So I want to prove that this quantity actually, it goes to zero as L goes to infinity. So you will notice that there is this JL at above the U. So it's just because U has a priori values in RD, so I have to fix one coefficient, but you can completely forget about it. It does not matter at all. So if you want, you can replace it by a form on RD, but it does not matter. So I take the sup over them. And but more importantly, I take the supremum over all the wave numbers. It's just because that in the limit L goes to infinity, if I don't have a norm on the wave numbers, then this quantity makes no sense. Okay. So now there is a slight issue with this formula. Okay, is that it assumes that I know that there is a solution. Okay, at later times. So it's not. It is clearly not so obvious. Because if you think of the initial datum, it is a Gaussian. So if you take a norm of the initial datum, it might be quite big. And so if you have a local solution, the time of existence, it will depend on the size of the initial datum, and so it will decrease to zero. So a priori, what I have written is clearly not valid. Okay, and so for this reason, the first part of my theorem will actually not be an exact solution, but an approximated solution for these problems, and which I will call quasi-solutions. Okay. And this means that I will do very few analyses. Okay, so I need to define this quasi-solution. So I want to find a sequence such that its sum is supposedly approximate well the solution. Okay. So for my sequence is built in the following. So the first item, UL node, is equal to the initial datum. And then the second one is the iterated Duhamel formula. Okay. So if I look for at n plus 1, then I should sum all the other guys for n1 plus n2 equals to n. So n1 and n2 are both lower than n plus 1, strictly less than n plus 1. And then I integrate between 0 and t the nonlinearity. So it's really just the integrated form of the equation. Okay? And so now if formally you sum so now if formally you sum on n this equation on the right, you will find that actually this sum on L, it satisfies the fixed point that is supposed to be satisfied by the solution. Okay, so if you know that it's well posed, then probably you have that the sum over ULN would be equal to the solution. Okay. And now I will look at approximation of the solution in the sense that I will look at truncation of this series. Okay. So I will look at partial sum for the sum between 0 and big N of ULN. Okay. Okay, so the result is the following. So if I take R is my number of Fourier coefficients that I want to consider at later times. I take any t in R, and any n is just the level of quasi-solution where I stop my approximation. Then there exists a constant which is not that good, but such that for all L, for all coefficients that I look at, and most importantly for all wave numbers, you have an explicit estimate on how the expectation of the product of Fourier coefficient differ from the Wick formula. So it's just bounded by C over L over 2. So this is relatively standard, but what I will try to show you, if I have the time, is that actually we can get a very, very finer estimates, which will depend on the parity on R and the algebraic relationship satisfied by the Xi L. So we have already seen that if the sum of the Xi L was different from 0, then this quantity, this expectation is 0, but also this guy will automatically be 0, and so this C over L over 2, it can be 0. Okay, so you can in this case, you can improve the estimate, but we can see in more cases we can see how we can improve it and compute its order in L. Okay, so the constant C is explicit, but unfortunately it depends very, very badly on the level of approximation as in NR factorial, so it is not very nice. Okay. This is also something that I will discuss afterwards. Okay. So now I want to know how to get a result on the full solution, but this constant is pretty bad. So you think that we think that we cannot use the previous estimate to propagate it for the full solution. And so which means that if we want to look at something on the full solution, we need to find the way to make the sequence ULN converge in a deterministic way. Okay, so the problem is that if you look at what is approximately the norm of IL, it does not behave so well. Okay. So AL of X is nice, but AL as a norm, it is not so nice. So in particular because it is space homogeneous, and so if you look at its L2 norm on the torus, it will be like L d over 2. Okay. And if you try to take it for Sobolev norms, it will not change anything, it will be exactly the same. Okay, so you maybe think that it would be better if you take the LP norm, and it is the case. So if you take the LP norms, it will be something like L to the power d over P. So you think that, okay, so let P goes to infinity, maybe it will be better. And so, unfortunately, it is better, but it is not 1, okay? It is a square root of log L. So the idea behind this estimate, this what is approximately the norm, the L infinity norm of AL, is that if you think of it, they are L over D independent Gaussian variables that form AL. Okay, so if you want the L infinity norm to be small, somehow you need to make L Gaussian L over D, L to the power D Gaussian variable to be small at the same time. So you have to counterbalance L to the power D with if you want them to be smaller than big A, for instance, with E to the power minus A square. Okay, and if you want to make it match, then it means that you will have A like square root of log L. But if you want to see it another way, you can see that if you look at the LP norm, so actually there is a constant in front of L d over P, which is like a square root over P. And now if you want to optimize this in P, you will take P to be log L, okay, and then in square root. So this will make constant L to the power d over P, but unfortunately you will have the square root of P, which will make square root of log L. Okay, so what do we do? So to make sense of the solution, and because I have no other mechanism, I will just renormalize my initial datum, and instead of taking AL, I will make it small. So it is the same if you want as taking a small nonlinearity. It is exactly equivalent. Okay, and because I know that the growth of AL is like a square root of log L, I will ask that the size of the initial datum, I force it to be less than 1 over square root of log L to compensate for it. Okay, so the theorem in this case is the following. So first of all, okay, so we have a target time span, which is given by theta, so we fixed it as a beginning. And so if we fix this theta, we know that there exists some little constant C of theta, such that for all size of the box L, you have a set which is not of full measure, but which is of full measure in the limit L go to infinity, E such that EL theta, sorry, such that the flow of the Euler equation is well defined. Okay, when the ID, sorry, is taken into this set of not full measure, but of full asymptotic measure. Okay. And what is more, so I still want to know my difference with the Wick formula. So if you fix R, and then there exists a time span, okay, such that for all time in this time span, for all L, and then again for all the wave numbers, then you can make the expectation of the product of the Fourier coefficient, but then it has to be well posed, so you need to impose that the initial datum has been taken into this set EL theta node. And then you know that this guy, it differs from the Wick formula by something like 1 over L d over 2, but then I need my epsilon to the power R. That is completely natural because U, L, at the beginning, it has size epsilon, so it's natural that if I find my epsilon to the power R in the equation. Okay? Now, if you assume that epsilon of L is a little o of 1 of square root of log L, then the result is global in the following sense. You have that for all R, for all theta node, there exists some constant such that blah, 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 and you can get something like this. But of course, the constant, it depends on the time, so it might not be that good. Okay. Okay, so I did not rescale time, but I want to discuss a little bit time rescaling. I'm sorry because I might be a bit technical on this slide, but then I will try to stop. So if you want to rescale time, there is something very easy that you can do. So you can rescale time as a time scale epsilon to the power 1 square root of log L. You have to do no effort to do this. Okay, then you will have the formula that is propagated up to at least a small time, but at this time scale. Now, if you want to do something better and you think maybe it would be natural to reach nonlinear time, by which I mean epsilon minus 1, you might want to use an ansatz of the type that was developed by Deng and Hani. And which means that you will try to say that UL and then you make your N. Where you stop the approximation depends on epsilon, in this case in log epsilon. You want to make this, to use this type of ansatz, but unfortunately, there is a there is something that you can do. So the problem is that you have a very large number of combinatronics which will happen, which corresponds to this n factorial. And in works of derivation of kinetic equation, there is a counter effect that is used to counterbalance this. And in this case, it is oscillating. So in the case of the Schrödinger equation, it is oscillating integrals and the fact that you have a dispersion relation. But here you have no dispersion relation. Okay? So you have no hope to do something like this. So you have no hope to have epsilon minus 1 and, of course, not epsilon minus 2. Now, if you want to use an ansatz as a UL less than n, so with fixed n in terms of epsilon, but maybe relatively big, then it might allow you to go up to epsilon minus 1 plus eta with eta strictly positive, okay? Which would be nice if you know that epsilon and L are related into a regime where epsilon is like log L to the power minus beta, I don't know. So the problem is that when you do this, what you do is that so you plug your UL, you assume you write UL as a UL less than n plus a remainder, and you look at the equation on the remainder, and in this equation there is a source term. And the problem is that to estimate this source term, one has to use something which is called hypercontractivity lemmas, and I am not so sure that it will articulate well with this log L. Okay. But, okay, I stop this technical aspect, and I will go through the ideas of proof. Okay, so I could give you the full idea of proof, but I thought that it would be maybe time-consuming, so I decided instead to give you an example of the type of computations that might occur in the proof. So in this example, I will assume that the numbers of Fourier coefficient at later times that I want to look at is 6. Okay, so it is even. And I will stop my approximation at 1, so because I want things to be kept simple, so I will only look at UL1. Okay. So UL1, it is well defined, and you have a nice formula for it. It is simply minus t times the Leray projector of AL scalar nabla AL. So you can express this. So this is in the physical space, but you can express it in the Fourier space, and you end up with a formula which is complicated and that I don't want to write. But the point is that it's written like UL1 T psi. It is like T over LD over 2. Okay, this is just the convolution product, and then the sum over psi1 plus psi2 equals to psi of a function psi that indeed depends only on psi1 and psi2 and not on other parameters like L, and then the two Gaussians. Okay. What we deduce from this is that no, I repeat this for all my psi L where I want to look at the expectation, and if I look at the expectation of UL1 at wavelength psi L, sorry, I will find something like this. So I will have a T6, okay, I will forget about it. But then I have this 1 over AL to the 3D, and then I have a sum on 6 parameters. So I divide each of my psi L into psi L1 plus psi L2. Okay, so each wave number that I want to look at the beginning, I have to divide it. But of course, so if I write such a sum, then I sum on only one parameter. But then I have 6 guys with, I want to take the product, so I have 6 parameters. And then, okay, I have a function of these parameters. And then I have the expectation of the Gaussians. Okay, so a priori, you have 6 parameters. Okay, which means that if you forget the prefactor, it will make your sum like L to the power 6D, and then you have the prefactor, so it will be something like L to the power 3D, so you're not very happy. But fortunately, what you know is that, is that the GK satisfies the big formula, so you might gain some information from this. Okay, so let's apply the Wick formula to my expectation of product of Gaussians. So I can do this, but then I have the set I need to pair is a set that is 1, 6, which is coming from the 6 Fourier coefficients that I want to look at the expectation, and then 1, 2, which is coming from the decomposition due to the fact that I'm looking at UL1. Okay. And now I need to take pairs in this set. Okay, I have to divide it, to partition it as pairs in this set. Okay, so this full expectation, it will be null unless I can match one element of this guy with one element of 1, 6 cross times 1, 2 with another element of it, but not itself. Okay, which means that I would have I prefer, so I will have a pairing, okay, which I write sigma, and this sigma, so it will go from 1, 6 into 1, 2. It will be an involution because it's a pairing without fixed point, and it will be such that we need that psi Lg is equal to minus psi of sigma Lg. Okay. So I never charge the wave number 0, which means that in my previous sum, I have that psi L is never 0, because otherwise it's 0. Okay, which means that I cannot, if I match together xi L1 plus xi L2, okay, then xi L is equal to 0, so this cannot never happen. Okay, so so if I want this guy to be 0, I also need to have a sigma of L1, which is different than L2. And now the key ingredient in the proof is to computing the orbits of sigma. So I will try to make myself clear. So the orbits of sigma is that I will take one of the L's, which are related to the Fourier coefficients. I want to take the expectation norm, and I will see, and I will try to look at the ones I reach with this pairing sigma. Okay, which write in this way. So if you look at sigma of L, it will be all the L prime such that there exists J and J prime such that sigma L prime J prime is equal to Lj. So this is an equivalence relation. If you are trying to say, I can reach you by like this, so it's an equivalence relation, which means that you are only partitioning 1/6 into you are only partitioning 1/6 with this equivalence relation. So I have all my orbits, and they partition 1/6. And as we say, you cannot have a sigma L1 is equal to L2, which means that each orbit has at least 2 elements. Which means, in our case, that there are at most R over 2, which is, in our case, is equal to 3 orbits. So now I will give you an example, and I hope it will make it clearer. So this is a typical example of the pairing sigma that you have when the number of orbits is maximal, that is to say, is 3. Okay? So on the first line, I have written what is sigma. Okay? So it takes 1 to 2 and then 2 to 1. Okay? And 3 and match 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. So what happens in this case? So in the second line, what I have written is what this sigma implies at the level of the wave numbers. Now, what is nice is that if you look at what happens on the wave numbers, what you get is that the wave numbers that tells you the wave numbers that determines all the other ones are the ones that are put in boxes, okay? Because xi 1, 1, because of the sigma, it will determine xi 2, 2. But because xi 2, 1 plus xi 2, 1 plus xi 2, 2 is equal to xi 2, this determines xi 2, 1, which in turn determines xi 1, 2, and the same goes for the others. So I have only three parameters. And I also deduce something from this, is that now if I sum each of the columns 2 by 2, what I get is that xi 1 plus xi 2 has to be 0, xi 3 plus xi 4 has to be 0, and xi 5 plus xi 6 has to be 0. Okay, so it forces some algebraic condition on the wave numbers I'm looking at from the beginning. Okay. Okay, so what does it mean at the level of the sum that I am looking at? So I have, remember this big sum. So now I have three... Okay, so I used to have 6 parameters, but now I have only the 3. Okay, which means that now my sum is of order 1. Okay, it's of maximal order, but it's of order 1. But for this to be of order 1, I need to some algebraic condition on the psi. Okay, and that's it. Okay, I will now give you an example of an involution when I have exactly 2 orbits. Okay, a typical example again. So when I have two orbits, so I have written sigma, okay, and I can do the same, exact same stuff that I did before. And now, instead of having three parameters, I have only the two, because I can do the same game as before, is to pass from xi11 to xi22, then to xi21, blah, 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 and then I go down to determining all the xi. Okay, so if I have two orbits, I have two free parameters, okay, but I also imply some algebraic condition on the initial xi, okay, which is that xi1 to xi4 is equal to 0, and then something, and then xi5 plus xi6 is equal to 0. Okay, very good. So now I can do exactly the same with a typical example with one orbit in my sigma. And again, what happens is that you have now only one free parameter. And now what it implies on the initial xi is that their sum should be 0, but this, you know from the beginning that they should be 0, so it is not surprising. Okay. So what do we learn from this? Is that the contribution of an involution, so it is really led by the number of its orbits. Okay, so if I start to my first example with sum on three parameters, so I had the sum of order 1. For the red one, I had to sum on two parameters, which means something like 1 over L to the power D. And if I do it for the last. For the blue one, then I summed only on one parameter, which led the sum of 1 over L to the power 2D. So I get less and less order in this. Okay? And the fixed condition on the psi L. Okay, so if I am in the first case, I have this algebraic condition on the psi, then the green will contribute, the red will contribute, the blue will contribute. If I only have this, then the green will not contribute, but only the red and the blue will contribute. Which means that if I look at my sum, it's actually not of order 1, it's really of order 1 over LD. Okay? So it's of a lesser order. So more precisely, I can make it a general proposition. So if I look at R stuff, so I can divide one R into a partition, okay, such that in this small subsets of one R, the sum of the psi L is 0. Okay, there is one because you can. The worst case scenario is that if the partition is only one set, okay, but you have one that has maximal cardinal, okay. At least one that has maximal cardinal. And in that case, what you get is that if you look at the expectation of the Fourier coefficient, its order will be driven by this cardinal of the partition of 1R. So it's of order O of L to the power D times the cardinal of the partition minus R over 2. But as we have already seen, we need that the cardinal of I to be less than 1 over 2. To be less than R over 2. In this case, so if the cardinal of I is equal to R over 2, then what happens is that we have the leading order, so the term of order 1, okay, and it corresponds exactly to the Wick formula. Okay? So this is how you retrieve the Wick formula from this algebraic computation. Okay. Okay, so what I mean is that you really have a finer estimate depending on the algebras that is satisfied by the psi L. Okay, so now I will go to the idea of proof for the full solution. Okay, I will probably stop here. So if you look at the Euler equation and primitive atmospheric equation in general, so a good way to solve the problem is most often to perform the fixed point argument, a Banach fixed point argument for a regularized problem or for analytic data. Okay. And then if you want to have more information of it and develop it into the energy space, you use conservation laws of the equation. And then you can conclude by using compactness of bootstrap argument. But if you use compactness argument, you lose the fact that the flow is well determined, that it is unique, etc. And in particular, the sequence that I showed you, it cannot converge, okay, because its convergence is really equivalent to having a Banach fixed point argument. Okay, so here we do not pass to the second stage; we remain at the first one. And so what we do is that we solve the equation, but in Gevrey type analytic data. So not exactly Gevrey. It has to be modified to be adapted to the fact that it's better to have infinity norms than L2 norms, say. And then so once I have adapted my Gevrey type analytic data to this infinity norm, well, what I do is that I perform a sort of fixed point argument by exploiting the Cauchy-Kovalevskaya theorem. So now I think I'm out of time, and so I will thank you for your attention.